Thank you everybody for joining today's panel discussion, which is going to focus on the personalisation of the customer experience in financial services. Very much a hot topic and something at RFI that we've been engaging with our clients on in recent times. I'm going to be joined on the panel today by four industry experts who are going to be providing their perspectives on all things personalisation. So I would very much like to introduce everybody ahead of the conversation. So first, I'd like to introduce Nick Tubb, Head of Financial Services at Facebook. So welcome, Nick. Second, Amy Cunningham, Head of Digital at ING. Thirdly, AB Chavan, who's Regional Vice President at Backbase. And last, but very much not least, Jess Gleeson, who is Head of, who's EGM of Digital at Suncorp. So welcome everybody to today's conversation. I'm going to be posing a number of questions at each of you, which focus on the topic of personalisation. We're going to be approaching it from a number of different directions here, which are going to include what's the need to focus on financial services of personalisation in financial services, what's the customer demand, what's the progress that's been made so far when it comes to financial personalisation in financial services, and also what's the end goal here. You know, when we're thinking about personalisation, where do we take customers on the journey? So without further ado, I'll jump straight in to questions. So I think before we really get into the detail here, I thought it's appropriate to start out by just clarifying what it is we mean when we talk about personalisation in a financial service context. So I might, if it's okay, just sort of pose the first question at Amy. When you hear about personalisation, what does it mean to you?
Thanks, Alex. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me today. It's great to be on this panel. I think when we think about personalisation in the financial services context, it's really about, firstly, as a customer, show me that you know me. How do you give me proactive insights based on information that you know about me and make my life easier? So I sort of think about it about, banks doing the grunt work in the background, looking at all the information that's available, using actionable insights from that information, and then really, putting the control in my hands as a customer to be able to make choices I want or to be informed with those decisions. So it's about building deeper engagement. It's about building trust with our customers. And really, once we get that right, and we can do that on a banking level, then there's a really exciting sliding scale of what personalisation can mean into the future.
Perfect. And Jess, could I get your perspectives on that?
Absolutely, and yeah, thanks again for having me here today. I 100% agree with what Amy just said, and I think that there's a couple of factors that are playing into why we want to be there for our customers with personalisation. Obviously, much more competition happening in the market for customers and choices around where they choose to interact. And as a financial services industry, we want to stay really relevant to our customers. We want to make sure that they feel like we have their backs, we're on their side, and that the experiences we give to customers are what they need, not a generalist, could be anybody kind of experience. The other sort of element of that is obviously we're all interacting with the Facebooks, Nick, and and with Netflix, and especially for all of us that have been in lockdown for 4 months, I think we're highly familiar with all of our streaming platforms, and there is just this new expectation around personalised and curated experiences for customers. And if you've got an organisation that's a bank that you're making payments with every single day, they should know you. They should know you and be able to serve to you things that you need. And for me as a customer who've banked both with organisations that have really sophisticated personalisation capability, and now in a space where at Suncorp we're really on the beginning of that journey, it's very different. And you sort of start to notice it when you about something that you no longer have. So for me as a customer, I just think it's an absolute ticket to play and a reason why you would choose to bank with a certain financial institution.
Yeah, perfect. I'd like to pick up on some of those themes later on in the conversation today around where the influences are coming from and the role that Netflix and other experiences that customers are having are playing in driving the demand for personalisation. But Before we get there, can I, Nick, could I get a kind of a Facebook perspective on what personalisation means to you?
Yeah, look, I think, well, firstly, thanks for having me here as well. I think I echo a lot of what Amy and Jess have said. And I think if I'm kind of thinking about what that means, a lot of it is about the exchange of mutual value. So I think that it's not, there's a lot of talk about personalized experiences that can be very passive, and actually the value just exists on one side of the equation. And I think the real personalization is where there is mutual value for both the consumer and the business. Things like retargeting or website testing, like they're all things that are effectively conversion efficiencies, really. Like they're really important, but are they true personalization? I think personalization kind of comes when you start thinking about what is the experience that a customer is having with an organization, and is that a dialogue, is that a conversation? And I think that's where we're going to get some really interesting kind of true value from personalization.
Perfect, thank you, Nick. And AB, before I move on, anything to add?
Thanks for having me here. It's great to be part of this conversation, and I totally concur with the viewpoints which the fellow panelists put together. I think from a Backbase's point of view, even from my own experience from before my Backbase journey, I think personalization is always about providing the right message to the right customer at the right time and the right channel, right? And I think the idea here is for our generation, perhaps, who are pre-millennials, the personalization makes sense, because we have seen when it is not personalized and when it is sort of targeted towards a mass and not to an individual, we can see the difference. But if you look at our kids, perhaps the millennials and the Gen Zs, for them it's the way of life, and it is being shaped by the likes of Facebooks and Netflix and the Ubers, where they start their next conversation where they left it off last time, and for them it's the only way to work with, isn't it? And I think from the point of view of Backbase, what we have seen in last 10 to 15 odd years since the time our product has been there in the market, the kind of conversation we have with our banking clients, the conversation we had 7-8 years ago were to do with how do we remove the friction in the customer journey. Then it moved down to how do we orchestrate different data and the value and the context across different systems and bring it together. And finally, right now, we are also focusing on something called as being a leader in engagement banking, and which basically means how are you owning that customer experience with the client. And that is absolutely a function of personalization, that how good is your interaction with the customer, and whether you are maintaining that context from the last time the customer spoke to you. So I think that from my point of view would be a personalization, how it means, what it means, and how it can perhaps be achieved.
Perfect. And perhaps AB, before I let you off the hook, from your perspective, just how critical is it that financial services organizations get personalization right and they make it a priority?
No, it is absolutely an imperative for every bank, every financial services organization, because frankly, till about 5 to 7 years ago, that used to be differentiation. Now these are table stakes. And of course, getting the personalization right, very few entities or companies in financial services world have actually achieved it. It is important because now you're no longer competing with your the other entities within your own industry. You're competing with something completely different, like the Facebooks and the Netflix and the Uber. What we call here is, this is essentially a war for engagement, for customer experience. And unless you have that personalization, unless you own that particular moment of interaction with your customer on your app, on your internet banking, or through any other channel that you can, or any other form factor that you have, you probably will not be able to continue to be a market leader, or even try and achieve that market leading position. So it is absolutely imperative. And if you take example of something like Australia, I think one of the things that we have seen in a recent study that we had commissioned with Forrester is almost more than 80% of the customers, they really want personalized services. But when we ask them a follow-up question, that how many of the banks or the financial services are actually providing it, it is perhaps somewhere close to 35%. And that is for a developed economy like Australia and New Zealand in that particular region. So that basically calls out that, yes, there is an opportunity and there is that need that needs to be catered to. So it is extremely important.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, complete agreement here from me on that, I think. Nick, anything to add there in terms of just the importance of making it a priority for your financial services clients?
Yeah, look, I think obviously there's the benefits of personalisation and the reason why you would make it a priority. But I think the other side to making it a strategic priority for a for a bank or a financial service organisation is just that a strategic priority within an organisation needs to come centrally. And it doesn't sit within any one given or division or one line of business. And I think that's one of the things that personalisation needs to really think about, because both the implementation and the execution of personalisation needs to come from the core, if you like. So for me, making it a strategic priority within an organisation would do that. It would mean that it comes from the core as opposed to it coming from any one given division.
Yeah, perfect. Perfect. And then I think, you know, something that we've already touched on to a degree, but I think is something very evident is, you know, where's the demand for personalisation coming from? And it's coming from experiences that customers are having in other aspects of their lives. So when they're consuming entertainment, when they're buying retail items, etc. You know, that's where the demand is coming from, even outside of the financial services experiences that they're having. I mean, again, I guess to an extent, a rhetorical question, but I mean, you know, are we all collectively in agreement that that's where the need for personalisation is coming from, or where the incremental demand is coming from? Perhaps I might pose that of Nick again, if that's okay.
Well, I think like Netflix got mentioned earlier, and I recall a conference where one of the engineers mentioned that 80% of all of content consumed on Netflix was basically the result of their personalized engine. So they are a personalization organization. There's no doubt about it. And if you look at the some of the fastest growing organizations in the world, they have personalization at the core. So I think what's interesting here, though, is that personalization that we're experiencing on a day-to-day basis is actually quite invisible and expected. So it's actually thinking about, yes, they're raising the bar. And I think to AB's point, it's a case of they're actually winning consumers' attention by doing this in quite an invisible fashion. And so brands are actually competing for that attention as well. So I think that if a bank sends me content about a first home buyer's guide when they know that I already have a home loan with them, then there's an inherent disconnect between what they're talking to me about, what they know about me. And I'm probably going to, like I say, they're competing with Netflix for me. So yeah, I think there's these organizations are definitely raising the bar and are actually competing on the same level.
Yeah, perfect. And Jess, I mean, I think you mentioned this in one of your answers to your first question. Anything you want to add on the topic?
No, I agree. There's just an expectation that you get it right. Just get it right. And then that sort of wins you the right to surprise, to go into that more integrated financial well-being or conversations about new products with customers just by getting the basics right. I know that when I log into sort of even Instagram, for example, and sorry, Nick, I'll continue to tease your platforms, but it's always fun to poke fun at the big dogs. But you get content because you're Googling something for a friend, and it's frustrating because you're like, I don't need this thing. It wasn't anything to do with me. And so it's sort of, you talk about that one interaction that drives a huge amount of content on your platforms. If you get personalization right and you're looking at the holistic picture, and I know for a lot of organizations, as you start to look at, particularly financial services cost out initiatives, you start to get personalized messages to drive cost out at a macro level that doesn't, relate to that customer at a micro level, and they react badly. And it's just, you see it in complaints data, you see it in App Store data, and it's not a mystery because customers tell us when they're not happy. And so, we're really fortunate in that way that we get the feedback, but also creates a real impetus to everyone to react quickly and improve.
Yeah, perfect. And Amy, I guess a question here for you really is around, any steps that you've taken to personalize the customer experience to a greater degree, and the extent to which that's been driven by customer feedback.
Well, I think, yeah, to that point, right, we're getting alerts and updates. I get, a reminder from my Fitbit that I need to drink more water, or I get a reminder to pack an umbrella because it looks like it's going to rain, when I'm heading out today. So I think it's definitely about being, instant at the right time for you, but also something that's really useful and helpful. So we know through, research, in the market, and we want customers want us to make banking a breeze for them, which is obviously our job. We know that they want their experience to be easy. So, whenever, wherever, low touch, that they want it to be trusted. So us being really transparent around, our interactions and the information that we're providing, making it personal. So keep me informed, reward me, help me make good financial decisions. And also around this kind of, quickness or ease and, fast access. So when we're thinking about how we're delivering some of those experiences, it's obviously has to be really relevant. So it could be things like, helping you with your savings goals, or we notice you might need some help to consolidate your debt, or have you thought about, maintaining your product in this way, or as simple as, we've noticed that you need to update your contact details, and we don't want you to have to, wait weeks for a card to arrive, and those types of things. So I think there's definitely a spectrum. I think as we move towards more sophisticated sort of data platforms and, being able to connect into partnerships and ecosystems moving forward, I think the sophistication will definitely grow. But I think at the moment, it's really around proving out that, making banking a breeze, and making sure that when I have my phone in my pocket, it's there doing a value, to that point around a value exchange, it's giving me a great value exchange with the messages and the personalization I'm getting.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, and I think, when I think about personalization at its core, really is making the best use of information and data that is available on your customers. Do we feel that financial services organisations generally are getting better and getting better at the speed that they need to be getting better at with regards to making use of the data that they have? I mean, perhaps I'll pose that one at AB if that's.
I think that is the prevalent discussion, right? That when you have disruptors, when you have neobanks, when you have big techs, they are providing a better sort of a customer experience, which is quite equivalent to the likes of the Netflix and the Uber. And then the question is being asked that whether banks really know how to own that customer relationship. Are the banks going to be just the plumbing lines in terms of feeding the data, whereas the actual customer engagement is owned by these super apps or these big techs? But then there is also other way of looking at it, right? Banks and the systems and the whole sort of applications and the stacks that they have that enables this kind of a customer experience was not built yesterday. That has been built over a period of last 3, 4, 5 decades. And that basically means there is going to be a bit of fragmentation. When it comes to big techs, these are digitally native. The neobanks, they are, or these new startups, the fintechs, they are quite well capitalized, right? For the banks and the financial services, they run on making sure that they hit their numbers year on year. So the profitability becomes important from day one as their KPI. If you don't hit those numbers, you'll probably not have that job. That perhaps is not the kind of pressure that, let's say, the big tech and the fintechs would have in terms of providing a customer experience while balancing the realities of getting the actual revenue. So I think these are the realities of it. But when we talk to our banking clients, and we have more than 30 plus banks within this Asia Pacific region, one of the key points one of our clients made was, Abhijit, at no point does a customer comes to me and tells me that please give me a digital banking app. That is not their requirement. If you ask a question to a client that, okay, how much do you want to interact with us as a bank, then the customer will probably say as little as possible, as invisibly as possible. And I think that is where that point comes in, right? So that in order to achieve the kind of personalization, what sort of priorities you need to have, how actually you implement that particular personalization, that becomes important. Does that sort of answer your question in that
Yes,
sense?
thank you. Yeah, thank you. I think in terms of, to make personalization, to drive personalization at the pace that you move that, we need to position it in a way where it's very clear that there's a benefit for the end customer and there's a benefit for the financial institution. In my mind, then, when I look at personalization, I can see a clear win-win for all parties in this. And again, perhaps a rhetorical question to a degree, but a question for the group. I mean, when I describe personalisation as a win-win for all parties, are we in agreement with that? And how can personalisation create value for all parties in the transaction? So, Amy, perhaps I'll pose that one to you. If that's okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely a win-win in that if you're providing value to a customer and they feel like you're are building a really deep and trusting relationship with them, then obviously in return there will be a mutual benefit in terms of being loyal to the bank, or looking at it from a long-term position in terms of a partner for your bank from your personal point of view. So I think there's a win-win. It's a spectrum from things as simple as just being able to manage your accounts and do things really simply and easily, to obviously going through and needing to have that really complex support or help, or if you're in hardship, etc. I think really the piece that it comes down to is how we make the digital personal. So we know that digital is the way forward, or people on this panel believe in that. But there's also a huge connection that we need to have with our customers in terms of not just being a digital bank, for instance. So how do we really have those connection points that we can speak to someone at the end of the phone, or that you can reach out and have that chat with someone if you're unsure about a particular instance? I think the connection between having the simple experiences that do their job, but also people feeling like they have that connection to a brand or a bank or a person in a contact center to call is really important. We can't sort of just step away from the fact that there needs to be the connection of those two, the human and the digital coming together. And I think it's how we bring that together and really bring that to life for our customers that will will make it a win-win, I guess, moving into the future.
Yeah, and Jess, a perspective from you on that as another financial services organisation representative?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I think it's a really interesting question. Does it need to be mutually beneficial? And there are scenarios where it is, getting alerts around payments in and out of your accounts and being able to, facilitates movement of money and engagement and, ongoing payments, income, etc. for the organisation. But you get into a tricky area, and I see these debates happen internally around what do you do when customers' behaviours are detrimental to the bank's financial outcome, but it's the right thing for the customer. So how to make additional repayments on their home loans, and what it starts to unpack is short-term outcomes versus long-term outcomes. And that, I think, has been a real evolution for the industry around how you help customers feel like you're on their side. And in some cases that individual transaction is possibly not in the best interest of the balance sheet, for want of a better term, but is in the best interest of the long-term balance sheet, the long-term customer engagement and relationship with you as an organisation. And, as again, an organisation at Suncorp, we're really excited about starting our personalisation journey. The connectivity of data and using the data that you do have is so important, but you do get into the battle of what's the right thing to do first, where are you going to get the most customer engagement, and where are you going to create the most value?
Yeah, so it sounds like then it's juggling perhaps short-term and longer-term objectives for the organisation. Is that fair?
Absolutely.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, and then I think obviously when I think about Facebook, I see very much personalisation at the core of what Facebook does and what Facebook is, really. I mean, anything you want to comment on there? I mean, what role does personalisation play in the Facebook experience?
Look, I think, personalization is obviously fundamental to Facebook, and it's fundamental to how people use our products. It's fundamental to how advertisers find value on the platform. So there is that mutual value there. For users, I'd say that personalization basically drives the whole experience. So the product is built on personalization, is why people come back and use products and services. If you consider that on Facebook alone, every interaction is basically personalized to you. So that means that every single day on Facebook alone, we bring over 1.9 billion personalized feeds in-app every single day. That's kind of where you start to understand the scale of that type of, and the priority of that to the organization. So I think it's probably, if anybody's opened up somebody else's Facebook app. That's the litmus test. You will quickly find that it's probably a very different experience to what you're used to. I've used to do it in meetings where you get people to swap their phones and get people to look at each other's Facebook feeds, and yeah, you get quite a different experience. From the advertising side, again, I think that's just how we help millions of small businesses find an audience that is relevant to them, rather than having to go out to en masse. It's about being able to surface products that small businesses have to the audiences that are relevant, and personalization helps that.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, complete agreement there. And it would be a very interesting exercise to open up somebody else's Facebook feed and see what they're seeing versus what you typically see. I tried that. When I, in preparation for today's conversation, I was doing my homework and I was doing a bit of reading on the literature on personalisation. There were various different articles that were all kind of pointing to the same thing, and that was what personalisation seeks to do really is to almost take financial services back to its roots, where a financial services transaction was typically conducted on a far more personalised basis. And then historically, what happened is digitisation really pulled typical financial services interactions away from that. And what personalisation does, to some degree, uses digital, uses technology, but to take them back. Take interactions back to where they came from. Perhaps a question for AB really about, are you in agreement with that? Is effectively what we're doing is going back to where we started and the more personalised one-to-one type of interactions, but using digital and data and technology to get us there?
Yeah, I think it is right to a certain extent. At the end of the day, which technology you're using it's just an enabler. The final outcome that we want, and I think that was quite evident when we looked at that earlier question, that what sort of value we are adding for the customer, what sort of value being added, and is it a win-win for all the stakeholders involved? So that in order to achieve that outcome, let's break it down simply, right? I mean, right now in today's world, if you want to have a personalization, the table stakes of it is you need to have a good, what do you say, a channel like a mobile banking app, or your internet banking, or a point of sale terminal which provides you with probably a self-help options, right? Self-service options. And in all of these things, what is common is that front end is intuitive. It is something that the end user can use. The end user can ask for it rather than being pushed to use that one. So that gives them convenience. That gives them they can access those services in their own time. That is the first part, convenience. The second part is in order to make it contextual to what they need, and they're not sort of repeating their conversation when they change the channel, that if you're moving from mobile app to, let's say, your internet banking, or they are talking to your call center, or they are even walking into a branch from a bank's point of view, they don't have to repeat any of the conversation or any of the information that has been provided, so that experience becomes frictionless. And if that is achieved, that is perhaps the table stake, and not many banks or not many financial services institutions have truly achieved this, for the simple reason, the way these services are enabled within the context of the operating model of these entities is done through different products and different product silos, which are again provided by a different backend system here, a different application here, and the different way of sort of orchestrating the data across. And this mismatch is where that basic requirement of having a frictionless experience goes out of the window. And that is where that is when the people start comparing that to, oh, but Netflix does that, oh, but Facebook does that, why can't you do it? I mean, there are certain challenges. Of course, it is not something that can be achieved just like this. It will require a bit of journey. It will require a bit of some key imperatives and the strategic directions and changes in terms of how that backend part, how that system integration and the engagement by orchestrating the value across different systems can be achieved. So to your question, yes, 5 years ago, we did talk about digitization. We did talk about a seamless onboarding journey for a customer. We did talk about self-service options. Now we are adding one more layer to it. And in order to make it personalized, all of these things need to be really synergetic to each other. All of these points cannot be done in isolation. And to Nick's point earlier, if you are thinking about digitalization on the side and not doing it as your core, personalization at the core of your operating model, you will probably end up having an experience which looks okay, but the moment you go to step 3 and step 4, suddenly you see the fissures in there, and suddenly you see the friction coming back in there. So I think that is how I look at it.
Yeah, agreed. I think probably what we've touched on so far, I think, in this conversation is it's very evident that personalisation does take and can take many different forms for customers. Perhaps a question for Nick, really, I suppose, about, in your mind, what are the different types of personalisation that financial services organisations are achieving, but perhaps more so can look to achieve in the years ahead?
Look, maybe I think that the conversation breaks into almost communications and experiences. A lot of what we've been talking about, there's these two sides. So I might just kind of go through a few things that I think probably straddle both. I'd say motivation is probably on the communication side of things. So making sure, like, thinking of drivers of relevance, motivations, and the interests of people, making sure that you've got the right message at the right time. That's obviously kind of one of the things that we've talked about already. I think context is an interesting one. Again, I think this has been mentioned by a couple of people, making sure that you are delivering the right experience or the right message based on the context, be that time, be that in the weather. You might have insurance companies that want to deliver certain services or communications based on what's happening from an environmental perspective. Different voices, I think, is an interesting one. So different people have different influences on people. So it might not be that as a brand you should, it's about talking to somebody through the voice of the brand. It might be actually, how do you use, in the world of Facebook and Instagram, how do you use creators? How do you use people with different types of influence to have that conversation that could have a different impact on somebody and make it feel more relevant to them? And then I think the final one that we've all been talking about a lot, because I think it's kind of the true personalization, is the different experiences that people expect. So from a Facebook or Instagram perspective, that is probably very much in the Messenger or WhatsApp side of the camp. And that's about having a true one-to-one conversation with somebody so that you can actually start to understand the needs and the desires and the motivations of that person and respond to them accordingly. And I think that's where digital can also, it doesn't need to be just about kind of, I think there's this feeling that a messenger bot is very automated and kind of remind you of the call center systems, if you like, but actually you can hand over to humans and you can make sure that you're bringing that human touch back into it. So I think those are probably some of the drivers of relevance for myself.
And perhaps I think, again, picking up on some of the points we touched on already, but perhaps a question for Jess here. Working within a financial services organisation, I think when it comes to personalisation, my sense is, perhaps, and challenge me if this is wrong, but you're perhaps requiring the organisation to think a little bit differently about how it services its customers. Perhaps at times you're pushing the limitations of what's possible from a technology or internal system perspective. Is that fair? I mean, what are some of the challenges that you've encountered when encouraging the organisation on the lines of personalisation?
Yeah, I mean, probably starting from the bottom of your questions and the bottom of the problem is data. Data becomes one of the biggest enablers but limiters as we see things, and where we sort of start to see a big correlation is you want a customer experience. So we're really trying to drive, like a thinking mindset around what do we want the customer experience to be? What do we want the customer outcome to be? And then as you follow the rabbit into what can you achieve with the data that you've got, then that is where we see the biggest challenges. And for, like, I guess, I don't want to use the word legacy, but your legacy banks, legacy organizations that have been around for a long time, there is a lot of disconnected data and a lot of, older systems, delays within the data as they get, into a position where we can utilize that data effectively. And one of the biggest challenges is actually driving the mindset of our people to say, I'm going to work through that problem, not I'm going to accept a substandard customer experience because of the data, and really trying to get the right balance between effort, delivery, and execution to really get a good experience for our customers. And I think the beauty of that problem, because, you're trying to find the silver lining, is to drive some of that experimentation, test and learn mindset. I know probably within Facebook and Amazon and, customers are really data rich. It's all about experiment, test and learn, do what you can, see what you need to do more of versus get it right up front, move on to the next problem. So there's good and bad elements to that, but data tends to be the biggest enabler and limitation when it comes to how you deliver a really good quality personalisation for customers.
Yeah, perfect. And Amy, do you have an ING perspective on that? I mean, any comment around some of the challenges that you've faced or successfully overcome when it's come to personalisation?
Oh, and look, I think, to Jess's point, it's definitely around those foundational capabilities and all the building blocks that you need to be able to stitch together to drive these really great customer experiences. So I think the foundational technology and architectural, strategy and data coming together is absolutely integral in terms of how you can operationalize all the insights that we want to. I think the second part is around, personalization is really an extension of your, being a customer-centered organization. So if you are, doing human-centered design, or, at ING we do a PACE philosophy around, what does innovation look like for customers? What does the right customer experience look like? That robust testing, customer testing, and research and the discovery, all the pieces of those puzzles, really in terms of the narrative of the organization, personalization is an extension of all the work that we're already doing from a customer insights point of view, but how do we operationalize and how do we bring those experiences to life and get them into the hands of the customer? So I think it's personalization can seem like a word that potentially people, can mean so many different things, right, to so many different people. But I think if we think about it as an extension of the work that we already do, the dedication we already have to the customer and how we bring that to life, that coupled with that foundational capability, that's getting those two to marry together is the end game.
Yeah, perfect. And AB, a question for you here. I mean, the responses to the previous questions touched on technology and the role that can play. I mean, any comment from you about how technology is helping banks improve the customer experience through personalisation?
I think it's sort of a self-fulfilling cycle, right? I mean, there is a need from the industry that now 5 years ago we were talking about digitization and digital banking and whatnot, and there you needed different products and what can I do now rather than over a 5-year period. I don't want to have a 10-year or an 8-year or a 5-year long core banking transformation or an entire line of business being overhauled. That conversation changed from there. And now we are talking about, as Amy mentioned, as Jess mentioned, that all of these financial institutions are orchestrating their offerings around the human-centric design. So it is about journeys. Earlier, it used to be, these are my products. How do I get these products out in the market? And what sort of channels I can provide to the customer to use those products? Now it's the other way. Now it is, this is the journey I need to put in front of the client, put in front of the end customer. And in order to achieve it, yes, I have 15 different cores. I have another 250 odd ancillary systems, and the data is fragmented across all these different stacks. Now I need to stitch it together. Now stitching that together, that is perhaps one of the major challenges. And I have not come to data at all. I'm just talking about how do you put that journey together for the legacy organizations. Now this is not the challenge that fintechs face. They don't have any legacy stack, which is where the data is fragmented or as fragmented as the traditional financial services organization. There they can start because they are already cloud native. They already have a single platform. They already have a ton of data through their primary super app or from their years of interaction outside of financial services realm. And they use that and leverage that and build and provide services which now cut across into the financial services. So if tomorrow I'm using WhatsApp seamlessly to do payments, then I don't think twice as an end customer. But if I look at it from bank's perspective, in order to have such such an intuitive way of transferring money, which I use, I don't know, a million times in a day. It's just an extension of my life. But in order for a bank to achieve that kind of a channel and that kind of seamlessness, I will probably require a few more years. So then it also falls down to, when it comes to technology, what is the basics that you must have? You need to have a platform view. You cannot have, I have a point solution and then I'm done. No, because your point solution, one point solution today will result into 25 different point solutions 18 months later. And then you'll again run a 12-month program in order to stitch it together. So that's an endless cycle. So you need to have a platform view where you can orchestrate all these data, all that context that you have across different systems, and then leverage that, use your big data engine over a period of time. Now, that is another area where not all banks and all financial services are on the equal level. I mean, someone like CBA in Australia, from I think Amy and Jess, they come from that bank, so they know how advanced they are, or DBS here in Singapore. So these banks have actually put forth how they have moved ahead of the pack in terms of making sure that they do have a platform, they do have those basic journeys stitched together. And when you add and sort of nurture and curate that data over a period of time, the kind of offerings they have, like for example, CBA during pandemic, they have that benefits finder. They sort of were able to provide the benefits worth of $450+ million worth of pandemic leaves or rebates or concessions and so on and so forth. And imagine the kind of value they added to the customer's life. So yes, technology is enabler, technology is important, but then rather than starting with something which is absolutely flashy and good looking, I would much rather would look at fundamental ways of having a single platform, unified view, empower my customers, orchestrate data orchestration in one place, and at the same time also empower my employees, because they are also quite important when it comes to origination of complex product, or talking or getting advice in terms of, let's say, wealth management, right? So all of these things are important, and that's how technology can help it stitch together. But the technology which is visible in the foreground, it's probably the bad use of technology. It has to be intuitive. It has to be in the background. The customer doesn't even know that, yes, it is because of the technology that is happening. It should be how this institution or how this ecosystem is enabling their financial well-being.
Perfect. All right, I'm going to pose one final question of each of you now, and this is really requiring you to get the crystal ball out and forward, look to the years ahead, and really, when we think about personalisation, what's on the horizon in financial services? I might start with Amy, if that's okay. And looking forward, what do you see with personalisation?
Look, I think this is going to be a really exciting space for personalisation in the financial services. I think it's really going to be about those connections beyond banking. So how do we move into a partnerships ecosystem? How do we really, open banking is here. How do we connect with different partners and brands and experiences so our customers have more than just a financial sort of view with us? I think innovation is going to be really important, but not innovation for innovation's sake, like useful innovation that we know is going to surprise and delight our customers, that we can get into their hands, that helps them be in control of their finances. And as AB said earlier, we kind of disappear into the background in terms of being there, but not needing to be front and center. And I think really it's about how we will start to move to see, customers seeing their whole life in the banking app, not just, transacting or transferring money between accounts. I think it will become a far more holistic experience.
Yeah, perfect. And Jess, any perspectives to add there? Your forward-looking view on personalisation?
I think the financial services ecosystem is evolving very rapidly. We've seen some big acquisitions of, fintechs into more mainstream banks. We've seen the Square Afterpay deal. We're seeing sort of big tech come into the financial services industry as well. And I think ultimately how banks respond will be a very big determining factor in the future of financial services. And I think, AB, you mentioned it earlier, just this ticket to play of knowing your customer and having your data in line will be fundamental to your ability to respond to that shift in the market. But I think we're going to see a much more integrated ecosystem world for our customers. How dominant you are a player in that ecosystem will be a determining factor in success.
And Nick, your final words on the future of personalisation?
Wow. Look, I think there's a big question. I think conversational banking is something I've talked about a little bit. I think that is a really interesting space. It's where you can truly provide that mutual value between kind of customer and business and understand what somebody wants. I think we also need to be conscious of the balance between relevance and privacy as we're going forwards. I think that's a really big one. So obviously important to recognise we're in a period of change there when it comes to personalisation in the digital ecosystem. And I think we're seeing that play out amongst regulatory, technological, societal. There's lots of different things at play here. So how we balance that desire for relevance versus the responsibility of privacy is something I think is going to be very important as we move forward. And then finally, I think just the proliferation of banking experiences that we'll probably start to see. So I think to Amy's point, open banking is probably going to broaden the number of experiences. If you think about what Netflix has done to content diversification, we'll see the same in terms of products within banking. So the question might actually be more about kind of like, how is personalization going to help consumers find the right product if the products and services just start really proliferating and diversifying?
And last but not least, AB, any final words on the future of personalization as far as you see it?
I think with open banking, data privacy, I think those are the two key things which the fellow panelist already talked about. I think that open banking will also, and the privacy related considerations will also put additional pressure on big techs, on neobanks, which perhaps, or the fintechs, which perhaps haven't had that kind of a regulatory scrutiny that legacy financial services organization have come to live with over the last several decades. So I think when it comes to the products and the types of the products, product origination, the jurisprudence, as well as the way of running that product origination factory, so to speak, I think the legacy financial services organization will always be a little ahead. When it comes to customer experience, of course, the big tech and the fintechs will always have a head start for the simple reason they are not shackled down by their fragmented system or the technology stack that they have at play. I think as within the data piece, I think that is where currently you see a lot of movements. There is a good front end being owned by fintech. There is good product origination being owned by legacy, and that middle fat data layer in terms of who makes the move in there and who can actually stitch it together. Good examples like CBA, like DBS, and I think in the next 2 to 3 years, you will essentially find those breakout players who have been able to stitch it together and through collaboration, not just competing. It may not be one silver bullet that, yes, I need to do all of these things together. Through open banking, through that partner ecosystem, through fintech collaboration, I believe in another 2 to 3 years, you will probably have those key gold standards appearing in there. But jury is still out. It's not a fully, the war for engagement is not over, and no one is a clear winner at the moment. This is the starting.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, we're at time, so I'll stop firing questions at each of you now. So thank you very much for your input into what has been, I think, a great conversation around the current and future state of personalisation in financial services. I might just offer my thanks to each of you, so to Nick, to Amy, to AB, and to Jeff. Thank you very much for your input into the conversation today. I think final words from me. We should have a great rest of the day, and thank you very much for the session.
Thanks, Alex.
Thank you.
Thanks, Alex.
Great to be here. Thank you.